Well, hello everyone. It's time to welcome you to the inaugural episode of TalkiNindies. It's a new attempt for me to try to find new ways to engage with people. Um, Usually I would have written this stuff down or had a typed up version, but since honestly the YouTube side of things is a bit more popular, we'll try it out this way, even though uh, people have been very clear that some people at least that my speaking is not always the best or the most coherent, possibly a bit rambling, but hey, if you stick with it, we'll see what we can do. So I opened up the questions, or opened up 4 questions to anybody who had thoughts or anything they wanted to ask for this first edition, and I got one question apiece from two of the Talk Nintendo podcast regulars that I always appreciate having a chance to get some feedback from. Usually very positive, so it's easy. I'm an easy sell. But the first one is Estuardo. He said, "Hey Justin, for a guy that plays about 347,000 games a month, what's the preferred length of a game to be really enjoyable?" I asked this because I prefer shorter games. Less than 10 hours is golden for me, but I did enjoy a few 10 to 20 hour games like Bioshock Trilogy. More than that, it's a chore for me. The only games I've really enjoyed that are longer than 50 hours have been Zelda games like Breath of the Wild and Fallout 76, and this was because I was playing with a friend of mine in co-op 90% of the game. It says, keep fighting and keep fighting the good fight, my friend, Estuardo. All right, so we'll start with what's the preferred length of a game to really be enjoyable? For me, that's become more of a complication. The nature of playing so many games and not really being able to commit a great deal of time to pretty much any of them in order to keep up with the sort of churn makes it a difficult thing. In general, though, of the games that I tend to, even with all the games that I play, of the games that I tend to complete, I prefer probably the 4 to 5 hour length, perhaps up to 8 to 10. Something that is manageable, something that is digestible. Like for instance, I used to dabble in JRPGs way back in the day. Like I love Square's Final Fantasy 3/6, depending on which way you look at it. Way back in the day, but in the modern era, after I had kids, it became I need to play games that are relatively quick and consume my interest for a short period of time, but I don't need to come back to immediately. If I tried to play, once I had kids, if I tried to play a really long game where I had to take a pause for a couple days or something, I'd get back in and I'd be lost. So I pretty much stopped playing longer games. At that point, right now both of my girls are going to college, but it's gotten better. But now with my grind of the games, it's tough. So I do still play like ongoing games. Like my ongoing addiction is Rocket League. It's a great game for me to just come back to over and over and over again. I've put in well over 1,000 hours on PC, but that tends to be my fill in the gap game. I tend to, every week or two, I tend to have one game that stands out of the indies that I will go and try to finish. Aside from that, periodically I do enjoy playing games with my one daughter, or PC games like Far Cry 6 is now something that I'm playing through bit by bit. But to answer your original question, I do tend to go off on a tangent. I'd say 4 to 5 hours tends to be where my target is based on where things are for me nowadays. But then I do also enjoy games like roguelikes or arcade games or things like that, where really there's no defined length of time necessarily. I mean, roguelikes, you can look at how long it takes you to beat it. But I tend to enjoy roguelikes whether I'm beating them or not. They remind me of arcade games. It's something that I can just jump in, depending on the length of the run for the given game. Some roguelikes run an hour, and I can do that. But a lot of them run shorter than that, especially if you're not if you're not feeling lucky on that run. So it's like, as with all things with me, I'm very distracted, as you can tell when I talk. 4 to 5 for a target, but I most commonly appreciate games like roguelikes or things like that don't require my long-term engagement or remembering where I am or keeping track of information. I tend to like games that stay very focused and tight. And the 4 or 5 hour length is more of a statement towards that's about how long my concentration generally can last. I mean, I did enjoy Breath of the Wild. That was obviously before I started this site and doing all this. So when the new Zelda game comes out, that may be a challenge. I tried to go back to Breath of the Wild briefly, and that was tough. I ended up giving up after probably about 5 hours. I just couldn't keep consistently playing well enough, and I completed it. I beat the game way back when, so I wasn't driven to finish it, but we'll see. So hopefully it answers your question, Estuardo. The other question is from another Talking Nintendo podcast mainstay, Grillz on Sizzle. He says, "Hey Justin, thank you for all that you've done to provide us with coverage with so many Nindies this generation. I've spent most of this year getting caught up on older JRPGs that I've missed in the past, so I've only recently gotten around to playing my first new game of the year, Xenoblade Chronicles, which I probably will be playing into September. Having missed all the year's indie releases, if you were to come up with a list of 3 must-play indies to represent 2022, what would they be? Also, what are the 3 indie releases on the horizon that players should have on their radar? I appreciate your expertise on the matter. Now, for the love of God, get back to the Talk Nintendo podcast." Well, first, that's every once in a while Perry will check in. We're trying to I'm always available, but they've been busy, so we'll see. We'll get to it at some point. So get back to your question. So the 3 indies that I consider representative for the year. Now, keep in mind, I'm always a bit reluctant to say what the best things are as a whole, only because so many people have different tastes, and I try to cater to as many tastes as possible. So with these questions, or with the answers to these questions, keep in mind that I'm looking at a very broad spectrum of folks and trying to throw them a bone in all cases, because with indie games, it's probably pretty rarely the case that you see games that appeal to everyone. There can be breakout games, but I mean, even something like Hades, as great as it was, or even Stardew Valley, which I consider like Hall of Fame level indie games on the Switch, those aren't necessarily as broad appeal of a game as something like Zelda, where it seems to meet the point where you've got hardcore players and more casual players, and everybody can agree that it's great. Stardew Valley might be a bit too slow or tedious for people that really want intensity. Something like Hades, it might be intimidating for people that don't feel that their skills are up to snuff and they don't feel like they're going to get a lot out of it. So, keeping that in mind, I'll give you, let's say, in that vein, we'll give you 6 games instead. I'm sorry. So, the first one, so far, the game I've liked the most this year, I really love. It's called Nobody Saves the World. It's just, I'd played it on PC. I'd actually almost beaten it on PC, but I played that solo, and then I played it co-op for quite a while on Switch with my wife, who it got a bit too hard for her, but it is a very interesting adventure. The main feature of it that stands out is this ability to change your form, which you have to do. And then you sort of get all this collection of skills tied to each form. As you play more with a form and you meet objectives, you end up unlocking more skills. And then once you have all the skills for that particular type of person, so there's very, very really wild variety. You know, you've got like a rat versus a mermaid versus a slug versus a dragon is the ultimate one you can unlock. But what you can do is once you've unlocked the skills, you can actually assign them to the other things, the other forms that you can take. So you end up being able to put together this hodgepodge of abilities, and different abilities have different elemental properties that'll allow you to break certain types of enemies. Will have these different elemental attributes to them that you have to break in order to be able to do damage. So you end up having to put together sort of this composite of different skills from different types of forms that you've had in the form you have currently as you go through dungeons and stuff like that. Now, co-op, it's easier because you can actually, you could focus on poison. I could focus on trying to think of what the other ones were. There's like a shield break one. I can diversify with co-op, so it's a bit easier. But in general, I really like the challenge. I really like the creativity. It's by Drinkbox Studios, the folks that did Guacamelee. It's just, I love the game and have a lot of positive feelings about it. It was a lot of fun to sort of go through and unlock all the different forms. So it's past my identified threshold of the preferred 4 to 5 hours, but I kept playing anyway. I think I put probably about 16 hours into it. So it's a longer game. There's a lot of content, but really enjoyed it. It's got its quirky characters, and it's a lot of fun and challenging. So that's one. Second one is Wreckfest by Bugbear Studios. I love Demolition Derby games, and weirdly, I love them even though historically there haven't been very many good ones. But Wreckfest, I'd seen it on PC forever and debated buying it forever, but since I didn't have time to commit, I wasn't willing to spend the money. But then when I heard it was coming to Switch, it was just like, oh yes, I finally get to check out this game. And then I had that tentative worry that that somehow it wouldn't live up to expectation, but thankfully that pretty much got shattered. It is just a lot of fun. It's in the same line. What was the previous game that they had made that I had? Oh, Flat Out. There was a series called Flat Out that I enjoyed that had a lot of Demolition Derby elements, and Wreckfest is really sort of taking all that experience they had from the Flat Out games. They took out the sort of weird events. There was an element of Flat Out that was fun because there would be events where you could do things like launch your purse and try to toward a target. They're just really weird events that were silly and kind of disturbing. But they took all that out. But they really focused on just core Demolition Derby races where you're going to be aggressive, and you have the option always of wiping out your competition, and some tracks that are just absolutely nuts. The great figure 8 tracks. So memories for me of going to a local dirt track with my dad, watching dirt track racing. In particular, I always loved figure 8 racing, so they have some figure 8 tracks, so that's always guaranteed to be some fun. It controls well. You can scale up the difficulty up and down very well. But the main thing is it's so hard sometimes to get the feel of the control of a car right. The overly simmy stuff, it tends to just be too hard, and it's easy to have oversteer and problems like that. Arcadey, it's too light. This is nice in the middle. It just felt intuitive, so I really appreciated that, but also just love wrecking stuff. So I had a great time with that, finished everything there was in it. I love that game. So that's another one. A third one is Neon White, a game that I'd seen press about. They had a preview for influencers or whatever that I'd sat through. Usually I don't do those, but this sounded interesting, so I checked it out. And it is a really impressive game, challenging, really challenging. But it's like if you haven't seen it, there's a definite mix of parkour, kind of skill. There's definitely a exploratory element. There's a skill element. It's hard to sort of put a finger on. You end up going through levels trying to just survive them in general, but you can, depending on the type of level, there are elements where you're going to have to shoot or slash, and it's very precision. I mean, the shooting that you're going to have to do. Every time you take a shot, there's these cards that you accumulate, and that gives you your abilities. And the cards are very geared to the level, so you'll accumulate this card that you're going to need to slash this enemy, or to break through the floor of this one thing. So it's a very precision-oriented game. You have to time things right. You have to hit things right. You have to aim to get these things right. And this all could make it seem overly complicated or possibly overly challenging, but the most impressive thing about it is they did an incredible job of making sure it would run the way it should on Switch. So it's very smooth. It's very easy to be accurate. And the result is you get some of these really bonkers levels in a lot of cases where you're just dodging through traps and there's spikes on either side, and you're sort of falling under control to get to this other card that's going to then let you jump again, that lets you continue. It is an incredibly different kind of game from most I've played. It is challenging, but it's very rewarding. Whether people connect with the story elements of it, and I've seen criticisms that there's a bit much of that part, but if you want to focus on the action, there's tons there to enjoy, and it's a great challenge. Another one I would put out there, and this is going in again that completely different direction. Mini Motorways is actually super addictive. It might be available on mobile even, but it's a puzzle game by the people that made Mini Metro. But it just connected with me. I end up getting pretty addicted to it for a bit. It's smart. It's very compact. It's really very simple in a lot of ways, but it's challenging, and you end up learning sort of techniques of how to make the most out of the pieces that you have, and the chunks of roadway, and the different types of you can create bypasses, or you can have roundabouts. It takes a little bit of time to figure out how best to use those, how to approach things, and it's all about surviving, keeping your city going as long as you can before it ends up, people end up getting too pissed off and the thing ends. But it's really compact, but it's really compelling. I had a great time playing that. And then the last one, this is possibly a bit obvious, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Shredder's Revenge. I'm a big beat 'em up fan, and it's a blast. Now, it's not very long. It has all the problems that typically a beat 'em up has. In theory, it's not very long. There's not necessarily a tremendous amount of content, but it's a blast to play with other people. It's fun when you get through to unlock Casey Jones. Playing with Casey Jones is a lot of fun. You can play online, which is very viable, and it's gorgeous. They took everything about the arcade game that everybody loved, and it's all there, but it's been juiced up. And the folks at Tribute Games did a great job. Had a great time playing it at PAX East, just with some random people. And had a great time playing it with my family as well. And they don't always multiplayer games. When I tell them we have something to play, there's sort of a groan. But even though they're not necessarily beat 'em up fans, they had, my wife maybe not so much, but the kids at least, had some fun with it. And maybe it's a little button mashy in places, but hey, but it's just a really well made beat 'em up. Now, just to be clear, it hasn't taken the throne from Streets of Rage 4, which is still absolutely the best beat 'em up, hands down, on the system. But there are very different games, and they have a different feel. But yeah, if you loved the Turtles in the Day and you haven't checked out Shredder's Revenge, it's a lot of fun. In terms of the games that are on the horizon, keeping in mind that I don't actually see a lot of them, or it's a tricky thing. There will be announcements, and it's gotten a little worse in the last year, where there'll be announcements for games. And when the Switch was really in the earlier day, like the earliest days, it was, can you put this on Switch, was the question everybody would ask. Then it got to a point where you assume that most titles, short of being really, elaborate or crazy, you could just assume they were going to come to Switch. I think it's turned the corner a bit, where now maybe they aren't all coming to Switch. So I'm not holding out hope that all these things will, all the things that I see in press announcements and stuff, I don't assume that they're coming to Switch anymore. So we'll base this on games that I've played at PAX East, where I pretty much know that they're coming to Switch, or there's one case where it's a game that I know is coming to Switch. I didn't play at PAX East, but I've played the demo for. So one game that was interesting. We'll see if it plays out. But I like the idea, and what I played was really interesting and fun. It's called Rogue Spirit. It's a roguelike, and it's a game where it's very action oriented. You'll take possession of different forms, and different forms have different abilities, and you're just trying to basically survive and get through. But you just jump from one type of, you have your initial character, but you'll jump to different enemies that you have that have different abilities and attributes. And it's just, the idea is cool. It was executed pretty well. It looked good, and I like the potential of it. We'll see though, because it clearly worked, but at least what you could play, it wasn't finished by any means. So we'll see if that even is coming this year. But I liked it. Going in a different direction, I'm probably gonna butcher the way this is pronounced. Dordogne. It was really quite a beautiful game, and in a completely different direction, much more casual. It was about collecting memories. You'd be in an area, and you were trying to take a picture, sort of, that would capture the area, or you'd collect audio that would define the area that you're in, or the forest or something like that. And it was sort of like scrapbooking memories in a lot of ways. But it was very gorgeous. It's got a unique art style, and it was just thoroughly pleasant. So I'm curious to see how that turns out. A different one is Lego Bricktales, which is absolutely, it is really trying to bring you the Lego building experience in a digital form, and that's a good and a bad thing. The good thing is Legos are cool, and to this point, Lego games, it's tended to be, like the Lego Adventures. You'll just hit a bunch, you'll focus on a bunch of bricks, hit the button, and they'll just assemble themselves. This is really, you're going to be building stuff, and it's always task oriented, and it also has a physics component. So you'll build a bridge that somebody's going to go across using Legos. And the thing is, you don't just have anything to choose from. They'll give you a set of Legos to work with. Not always necessarily ideal. Sometimes what you get, it's sort of like, ooh, yeah, I'm going to have to be creative with this. It is complicated to get used to the controls, because you're having to move in a 3D space. You're going to have to, there's layers, because you can, put Legos on top of each other, but you could also stack them from the bottom. And just getting things into position and doing all that, and understanding, there are cases where you have to sort of meet two endpoints, and it was tricky. You had to keep moving the camera to make sure that you were really lining things up the way you were supposed to in three-dimensional space. But just it really did capture the Lego experience in a way that nothing has done before. So I'm really curious to see how it turns out. And like I said, it's just, it's build this thing, and it's not just to build it to look cool. It has to actually work. So there is physics involved. So you do have to worry about how you do this. So a different type of challenge and something that I really think will be interesting. Um, the last one that I have that, oh, two more. Sorry. Um, One of them, it's called Power Chord. It's another roguelike deck builder, but the theme to it is like this heavy metal kind of band. It's one of those things when you see it, it just reached out to me as a fan of, like 80s 90s hair bands and the metal scene and stuff like that. It's just a souped up version that it was pretty cool. We'll see how it turns out. Whether it really differentiates itself as a roguelike deck builder. There were some systems in it that were interesting. You can, focus your. Basically, you can focus on different members of your band to sort of soup up their abilities, and there are strategies at play where you could focus on perhaps balancing, and that would give you one set of potential outcomes against your enemies. But you could really throw all of your perks and stuff into one of your band members to try to just get them to be super powered and kick through. I didn't get to play too much of it just because the demo was relatively short and there were a lot of people trying to check it out. But like I said, I liked the vibe, I liked the look, I liked the music component. It was really cool. So we'll see how that turns out. And the last one, it just came out on PC formally, and I'm almost positive it's coming to Switch. It's called Fashion Police Squad. It's old school first-person shooter. It looks more along the lines of something like Doom visually. It's better than that, but it's got the much more old school visual look. But it's just so weird because it's rather than shooting bullets, you have you've got something that imbues color. It's like a color gun that you can shoot colors at things that are drab. You can extract colors from things that are too gaudy. Then there's another one that is more like a sewing machine for helping to hem up people that have overly loose suits and things like that. It's really weird and sort of silly, but it plays really well. Like there's a component where you have a belt that whips. You can use that to swing between poles and stuff, which is really cool and really well implemented. So it's a lot of fun. It's definitely odd, but it was really cool. So I'm looking forward to that being on Switch. So hopefully everybody enjoyed themselves. That brings us to the end. Let me know if you think this is a complete waste of time, whether it's something that you'd like to see more of. And of course, if you want to see more of it, you're going to have to ask questions. All right, so that's the end of the first episode for TalkiNindies, and hopefully everybody had fun. This is Justin Nation for Nindie Spotlight, and I'll talk to you later.